here at the Two Reel Cinema Club. I'm James Rosica.
And I'm Andres Lorente.
Nice comfortable seats here. Do you remember now? So you and I, right? We were at film school together about 2006, 2007. Do you remember when Al Gore visited the film school while we were there?
Yes. And
were you there? Did you go?
Yes, he was hawking his new, was it like a streaming service or a television network? And I don't know if anything ever came of it.
Yeah, I think he was sort of there to shill.
Yeah, he was a shill
on behalf of a company who had sort of given him some money. But he was like trying to. I mean, at the time, it seemed like a ludicrous idea. He was coming up with some new kind of cable channel.
Yeah,
and the idea was that they would host amateur content made by emerging filmmakers, and people would watch this cable channel and discover new filmmakers. And everyone was saying this. How do people get paid, Al? How does this work?
Yeah.
I'm not sure I like the idea of this. And then, of course, about 2 years after that, YouTube was invented, and basically Al Gore had sort of predicted YouTube and also sort of completely missed the target at the same time.
Yeah. There's something else I remember about that moment. The thing that impressed me more was how he came into the room, which was it's a small auditorium. It was that dingy little basement theater. I think.
Yes,
the studio. God. So there couldn't have been more than a couple hundred of us there. It was a very strange visit.
You could not fit more people without breaking in the fire regulations.
Exactly. Yeah. So I'm 10 meters away from the guy, maybe less than that, just really close. And it was just all of a sudden, from an empty stage, he just appeared magically. And I realized what it was is, they come in sort of surrounded by security people, Secret Service. So at one point, it goes from just being an empty stage to this sort of massive mob of guys in suits. And then all of a sudden they peel away and Al Gore is just sitting in a chair like he's been there the entire time. Says, "Hi, I'm Al Gore. I was very briefly the elected president of the United States," or whatever. So I noticed that. And then the other thing that I noticed was he looked around that room at all of us very carefully before he said in a word. It was just like he was surveying the room, in part probably for safety, but also just to sort of connect with what was around him. So it was that impressed me more. That's the thing that I remember. I don't remember any of the other stuff really.
I only remember two things about Al Gore. First, I realized that he was wearing cowboy boots. He was wearing a nice suit, but cowboy boots.
Yep.
You don't normally see his footwear when you see him on TV. No. So good for him. Good for him. Yeah. And the second thing I remember is that he had just enough time to shake three people's hands at the end, and he looked like it's just. Like he sort of wanted to go to the exit, but also he was sort of aware that people were coming forward to shake hands. So, right, better shake hands. So, and Kelly and I we were sitting in the front row. So he shook my hand and Kelly's hand, and there was one other person whose hand he shook.
Yeah.
So that was like slapping hands with Whitney Houston at the front of the stage or something like that. Whoa! I touched someone who was almost president of the United States.
I think 3 is like the absolute minimum that you're bound to do. You have to shake it with your hands. You're a lucky man.
It's the union minimum. But so at the time, Al Gore was kind of riding high as a movie star.
Yeah.
Because he had made An Inconvenient Truth.
Yes.
So that was like out in 2006. This is sort of like the height of Al Gore's cinematic fame. Have you seen An Inconvenient Truth?
Yeah, I had seen that probably months before going. When did it come out in 2006, or was it a little earlier?
I think it came out in 2006, yeah.
Yeah, so I must have seen it 3 or 4 months before moving to London. And I forget when he came. I don't know if he was there. He was probably there in one of our second or third trimesters, so he was probably there in 2007. But it was hot. And actually, a friend of mine was the stills photographer on that shoot, which is kind of strange. The whole film is basically his PowerPoint presentation, isn't it? He's kind of standing on a stage and then showing slides and talking about it. But I guess you have to have an on-set stills photographer even for that.
I mean, at the time, God, props to you for knowing the stills photography. You're so well connected. All I've done is shaken hands with the man, whereas you know the guy who photographed him. There was like a brief sort of enlightened moment, wasn't there, when it looked like environmentalism was so significant that you could make a feature film out of it.
Yeah.
People go to the cinema to watch it. And yet, we were saying before we started recording that, strangely, there kind of aren't that many environmental films.
No.
So, I mean, I will put Flow in that box, clearly, and Princess Mononoke, both of which we saw last week. But then I was kind of scratching around for, I thought maybe we could talk about films that are sort of about humans' poor stewardship of the environment. Mm-hmm. And you know what? This is not a widely explored story in fiction cinema. I was scratching my head trying to find things that could play in a double bill next to An Inconvenient Truth. There's not a lot, is there?
Not a lot that has done really well, or is just part of the entire zeitgeist of the cinema world. It's depressing. I mean, there are little bits of it. I think you occasionally get characters who are focused on environmentalism. The first one for me was Andie MacDowell's character in Sex, Lies, and Videotapes. What's that? Late 80s or something like that. And she's obsessed with rainforests being destroyed, and it comes out in this obsessively compulsive cleanliness that she projects. So I think occasionally you get a character who either if it's a documentary, you get a real life character, or a protagonist in a film, or some sort of character in a film that has an environmental bent or brings up certain issues. But in terms of that one just crystalline environmental film that captures the movement or captures the problem, there aren't a lot. And I think, boy, please, Two Real Club fans and members, family members, contact us, because we're going to be overlooking a lot of obvious choices. But I couldn't. Yeah, my list is short, very short. So yeah.
I mean, the first thing I thought of is Silent Running. I don't know if you've seen that.
I haven't. No.
So, it's a fairly culty, I suppose, 1972 movie with Bruce Dern. The reason I remember watching it so vividly as a child is because it was directed by Doug Trumbull, who had done the visual effects for 2001: A Space Odyssey. Yeah. He was this big kind of visual effects and models guy, and then was given the opportunity to helm a film of his own, and he made this. So there are a lot of great models and great visual effects in this film, but the story is pretty cute. So it's set in this future world where the environment has been so badly damaged that the only plants and animals, the only wildlife that still lives, is kept in these clean pods in 3 spaceships which orbit the Earth. So the rest of the Earth is far too polluted, and Bruce Dern is this kind of engineer come botanist who looks after these kind of plants and animals in these spaceships orbiting the Earth. And then quite early on in the film, the company that runs these ships, basically, I think they run out of money, or they get told, oh no, we're going to jettison all these plants because it's not making enough money, and we're going to go back to commercial service. So they're just going to destroy all the plants. These are the last bits of wildlife, the last plants in the world, not even in the world. And Bruce Dern is the only person who's upset about this. So he basically sort of sabotages these ships so that they cannot destroy these kind of artificial orbiting environments. And it ends all sort of pretty sadly. Yeah. It's a beautiful looking film, some great effects, but a bit of a downer.
Yeah.
And you would hope that if someone was making a film like this in 1972, the message might have got through by now that destroying the natural environment was a bad idea. And yet here we are 52 years later still doing the same thing. Yeah.
Well, I'm glad you went back a little distance. And to me, it's kind of ironic because I think of the environmental coming of age, the awareness is early 90s for me. But I think some of the better films sort of come at it maybe tangentially earlier, like the 70s. So a couple of films that just came up to me really were The China Syndrome, which is with Jane Fonda, Michael Douglas, who I think produced on that. And that's really about like hiding secrets at nuclear power plants and the dangers of nuclear power. And that's probably 74 or something like that. I don't know offhand. And then Silkwood with Meryl Streep.
Oh, yeah.
Because she's sort of an outspoken employee who wants to... So she's sort of a whistleblower, and then she's intentionally contaminated with radiation at her workplace. So I think it's interesting. I think of that as much more of like a politically aware time and revolution in the air in the 70s. And I think those 70s films come at the environmental, they don't come out and say, it's deforestation or that the global warming, we weren't talking about that yet, but we were already talking about some things that like poisoning ourselves and poisoning the environment at that time. And then we sort of lose some of that energy until who knows when. Maybe we lost it entirely. Maybe we still don't really have the energy we need.
We lost it, didn't get it back.
Yeah, possible, yeah.
I mean, there's a little element of that, isn't it, in Erin Brockovich?
Yes,
good.
That
dates from kind of 2000. And that also, it's talking about poisoning the environment, but only doing it on a very sort of local, small scale, rather than discussing it as a global issue. Having watched Princess Mononoke last week, it does occur to me that this is something that Studio Ghibli films return to, not uncommonly. The film before Princess Mononoke was Nausicaa and the Valley of the Wind, which is set in a kind of post-apocalyptic Earth where most of the world is covered in deserts. And I think you have to presume that there was some kind of either a nuclear war or some kind of wide, big devastation, which ended most life as we know it. And then even, I don't know whether you've seen Pompoko, which is a 1994 Studio Ghibli film, which talks about similar things in a completely different way. It's about this bunch of raccoons who are able to disguise themselves as humans, and their bit of forest where they live is going to be turned into it's going to be developed or turned into a housing estate or a store or something like that. And so the raccoons try and do their best to stop this happening by turning into human beings and turning up at town planning meetings and trying to sort of interfere with the humans on the humans' terms. But I don't think it goes together all that well. It's a cute idea about the natural world trying to get its revenge on the humans who are indiscriminately destroying their environment.
Yeah.
But it also kind of keys into that sort of that Japanese animist idea of kind of religion and spiritualism and spirits and animals and the natural world, and the way that they all kind of stir together into this kind of particularly Japanese cultural soup. So I suppose, I guess even something like Boy and the Heron that we watched last year, I think it does kind of tip its hat to this notion of looking after the world and taking some responsibility for stewarding the world that we live in. Yeah. So I suppose that's a recurring theme, but I don't know whether they're really getting any message across.
Well, the context of that is really deeply related to the bombings, right? The dropping of the atomic bombs in Nagasaki.
Okay. Yeah.
And Hiroshima, I think. Yeah. So it's like very obviously human caused, but I think the environmental part gets downplayed a little bit as a result. It's more like what humans are doing to one another, and I'm trying to block that film out a little bit because it was last year. It was long ago. Thank you for bringing that one back up. I think one thing we could say is that this is a realm where documentaries are doing a much better job probably addressing the issue than narrative films are. And I think, as a result, fewer people watch documentaries, in my opinion. People want to go see the popcorn films and the summer candy kind of films that are just not really about anything at all, maybe. So it's harder to get an environmental message film out there and in front of a lot of people and getting people in seats with it. So, but documentaries, I wrote down 5 documentaries that I think do a pretty good job of sort of tackling some environmental issues, or at least raising awareness. I'll
give you a list of 5. I'm looking forward to this.
I'm going to start with a film called The Cove, which is about a certain town, and I guess it is a cove in Japan where the people there usher in, they sort of guide dolphins and occasionally some orca into this one little area, and then they just slaughter them in this one spot, and it just becomes this bloody mess of a cove. And they do it like once a year. It's part of a migratory route, I believe, but it's also to harvest all the meat, and it's just easy killing. And it shows you a real difference between subsistence fishing or small scale commercial fishing, and just absolute slaughter of, like a mammal. These are mammals, aren't they? I mean, just sea mammals. So it just sort of points out, direct. You get a very visceral, direct image of what it's like to harvest dolphins in this way. So that's a disturbing film. Another one's
Cove.
Darwin's Nightmare, which I mentioned to you earlier, but it's about Lake Victoria having the people there, for their own consumption. They introduce a fish. I forget what it is. It might be pike or something like that. But they introduce a fish so that it will provide food. So this thing that you're thinking,
Right.
we're actually helping humanity, and we're making sure everyone's well fed, but at the same time, this is a fish that is completely invasive and has basically just eaten every other fish out of the lake and kind of destroyed the lake. So those are a couple films where we're really just holding a mirror up to some of our attitudes towards the environment. And in both of those films are just they are so clear and so obvious in the damage that we're doing to the planet. So those jump out, and I think when you've got images like that are real images, as opposed to something that you've composed and written and produced for the screen, I think the reality sets in a bit stronger. And even Al Gore's slideshow, as kind of academic as it is, it gives you the evidence, it gives you data. He's showing you glaciers and ice pack that has reduced dramatically over the years, and he's giving you facts and figures. So it's probably a realm where documentaries do a little bit better. I think Virunga. I don't know if you saw Virunga a few years ago, which I think was nominated for an Oscar for documentary. And the reason I also mention it is because Patrick Johnson, friend of the pod, who I mentioned I think on the last episode, he scored that, and I think he may have been up for an award as well, but it's about a national park in Congo, where I think it's a lot of the mountain gorillas live around there. So there's there's this large ape population there that is totally threatened by encroachment from humans and poaching and deforestation. So again, I guess all those films are kind of similar in the sense that they're really talking about how we directly are influencing not only ourselves, but also just clearly affecting other inhabitants of the earth. So that's 3 of them, but I'm going to turn it back to you. Do you have any documentaries on your list, or do you have a comment about documentary?
So I do have My Octopus Teacher on my list.
Mine too.
Which we all kind of sat down and watched as a family on Netflix a year or so ago.
Yeah.
And that is, it is a sweet, rather affecting film. Mm-hmm. And I must say, having watched that film, I am never eating octopus again.
Yeah.
Those guys are really intelligent, aren't
yes.
they? So I feel like, I'm not going to eat a creature which you can probably do a crossword better than I can.
Yeah.
And it's a small scale, very personal film.
Yes.
About a guy who is he's like a marine biologist, isn't he? And he's also I think he's struggling to communicate with his son, something like that, I think.
Yeah.
And he I kind of just learns so much by observing this octopus and watching it in its own natural environment. And it gets him to look into the mirror a little bit, I suppose, basically. And he sees the octopus, but also he sees himself.
Yeah.
But the implication in that is that if we destroy the octopus's environment, then there is no more octopus to teach us.
Yes. Yeah.
So, in any of these kind of nature documentaries, the implicit message is this is something which is worth preserving.
Yeah.
You kind of say, I like books, but I did read a thing in The Guardian this week. I don't know whether you saw it, which is about, there's a piece by Tess McClure about humans abandoning settlements. So when we watched Flow, there's no humans in that film. And, it certainly seems to imply that there are no humans anywhere. But she points out in this article, since the 1950s, apparently humans have abandoned about 400 million hectares of land. People, leave the country and they go to the cities.
Yep.
Especially, I think, in Eastern Europe following the end of communism, a lot of people left their cities. So she wrote an article where she went to Bulgaria, where there have been a lot of people who lived in villages, and the villages have just got smaller and smaller and smaller until they've just kind of disappeared.
Yeah.
And there is a sort of a narrative. I don't know whether we were recording or not when we were talking about the dogs of Chernobyl. But there's this sort of implicit narrative that when the humans leave, or things get much better and nature moves back in. But she points out that the proper environmentalists will tell you, it's not so straightforward actually, and that when the humans leave, well, sometimes that just lets invasive species arrive who then voraciously take over a small area, and it doesn't immediately return back to being a natural environment at all. It's just a different environment. So human beings are quite capable of messing up an area even when we're not there. Which means you're left with a bit of a complicated picture. It's kind of glib and easy to think that, God, this planet would be better off without us. But even if we weren't here, we've done so much damage that just leaving it alone would still cause more damage.
Yes.
It's kind of up to us to actively try and put it right rather than just bow out of the room and let nature take back over again.
Yeah. That was one of the things that I liked about Flow, which was so understated and subtle, was that there was evidence sort of humans here and there, and scattered everywhere. It's not the humans weren't just in like one small story world in that film. There were ruins here. There were the ruins at the outcrop of those like pinnacle islands, whatnot. So yeah, we have touched everything, and now some people who shall remain nameless want to go to Mars and then just literally mar another planet. Why would you want to do that? I think we've done a great job of messing this one up, so I think it's fairly guaranteed. On the other hand, I'd say, look, hey, dude, if you want to go to Mars, go right now, please.
Send us a postcard when you get there. What were your other documentaries?
Well, it's sort of the trio of documentaries. My Octopus Teacher not being one of them that you mentioned that, and I think that was wise to do so. It's the Koyaanisqatsi, Powakatsi, Baraka trilogy. And it kind of occurring to me that visuals are really going to help us in this quest to like bring more attention to environmental concerns. Because I think people need to see it. If you're just watching your TV and you're living your nice suburban life or whatnot, with little contact with the environment, you're not going to feel the urgency. So I think what those films do really wonderfully is they show the natural world a lot, which is like all this, sort of fast action photography and these sort of time, what do you call it? Time
lapse.
Time lapse photography. Thank you. So you're seeing the natural world, but you also see the human world, and you see how sort of incongruent they are. And it's all pictures. It's just Philip Glass soundtracks, and it's just images. And maybe that's a much better way. Automatically, essentially, it's a much better way to bring the cause to the people, as opposed to trying to write some sort of narrative film that might sound kind of too goody-goody or too pat and wouldn't be as effective. So I think maybe those films are really kind of the best example, because they really show us as we are, and they show the planet as it is, and the struggles for both humans and the planet. So I love those films. I'm kind of torn on Philip Glass. I think his music works really well in those films. But I really liked them, and they were just, pure images, pure visuals. And I think maybe that's why documentary has an edge, because you can just show the show and not tell. And it's, it's like inherently cinema, and yet it's not narrative. It's actually just showing the world as it is. And I think if people saw a lot of the crap that's happening, or saw this, this massive, I think I talked about that recently, that massive ocean or island of plastic in the Pacific Ocean. I think if people really saw that, they would become more and more disgusted with ourselves. And I think that would probably be more compelling and a more urgent call to action than something like Aaron Brockovich, for example. Which is fine and good.
Bring it to your doorstep, don't you? There's those Koyaanisqatsi pictures. They fit right into our wheelhouse, don't they? Because they don't have any dialogue at all, which is what we love on the Two Real Cinema Club. But in the same way, having just watched Flow, which has only just made its money back, maybe we are pretty much the only people who like these films that have no dialogue. Right. Well, I'm looking at my empty bucket of popcorn here and feeling guilty. Is this cardboard or is this plastic? This is cardboard, isn't it?
Are you talking about the comfy chairs that you mentioned at the beginning, or are you talking about the popcorn?
Yes. My trousers. Yes. Are these recyclable?
We do wear trousers on the Two Wheel Cinema Club. I started eating the chair. It was so comfortable. So I think it is cardboard, but it's delicious.
For the fibre.
Yes.
For the fibre. That's recycling. Right, let's go and see a film about sex workers. Right.
That's the wheelhouse, all right.
Yes, that's the wheelhouse.